In 2008, Egypt imported 60% of its wheat from two countries, just two. When global grain prices spiked that year, bread prices in Cairo doubled in 4 months. Riots broke out. People died in bakery lines. The government nearly collapsed. 3 years later, it did collapse. You think the Arab Spring was about democracy and Twitter? Fuck no. It was about bread. It always is. Right now, as you're watching this, there are 23 countries on Earth that import more than half their calories. Not their luxuries, their calories. And the entire global food system, the thing keeping those countries from chaos, runs on a supply chain so fragile, so concentrated, and so weaponized that if just 3 choke points failed tomorrow, 1 billion people would be 90 days from starvation. This isn't a documentary about farming. This is about control. And you're about to see how food became the most powerful geopolitical weapon nobody talks about. Here's what's insane. We produce enough food to feed 10 billion people. We're only at 8. There's no scarcity problem. There's a distribution problem. And that distribution is controlled by a system so tightly held that 5 companies move 90% of the world's grain. 5. Cargill, ADM, Bunge, Louis Dreyfus, COFCO. You've never heard of most of them. That's the point. These aren't grocery stores. They're commodity traders. They own the ships, the ports, the storage silos, the price data. When a drought hits Kansas or a war breaks out in Ukraine, they see it first, they move first, and they profit first. Governments find out later, and by the time your average citizen notices, it's already too late, and shit's already expensive. But here's the thing that keeps me up at night. This system wasn't designed for resilience. It was designed for efficiency, just-in-time delivery, minimal storage, maximum profit, which works great until it doesn't. And when it doesn't, countries don't just get hungry, they collapse. So let's break down how this whole thing actually works, because once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Start with the basics. Food moves in 3 layers. Layer 1, production. The world's calories come from a stupidly small number of places. The US, Brazil, Argentina, and Ukraine grow 60% of globally traded grain. Russia and Ukraine alone export 1/4 of the world's wheat. 1/4. If something happens to the Black Sea, war, blockade, bad harvest, bread prices go haywire from Beirut to Bangladesh. You're not eating locally. Nobody is. Even if you think you are, the fertilizer for that organic kale came from a mine in Morocco or a gas field in Russia. Layer 2, transportation. Now here's where it gets stupid. 90% of traded food moves by sea, and 80% of that passes through just 7 maritime choke points: the Suez Canal, the Strait of Malacca, the Bosporus, Hormuz. Each one is a single point of failure. In 2021, one dickhead container ship got stuck in the Suez for 6 days and global trade lost $10 billion. That was an accident. Imagine someone does it on purpose. You can't reroute a grain shipment the way you reroute an email. Food is physical. It rots. It needs refrigeration, inspection, unloading infrastructure. You can't just drive wheat around the Cape of Good Hope and hope it arrives fresh. The system has no plan B. Layer 3, dependency. This is the ugly part. Most countries don't just import food, they import existence. The Middle East and North Africa, they grow almost nothing and import almost everything. Egypt, Yemen, Lebanon, Libya, these places are one bad harvest or one closed shipping lane away from mass starvation. They know it, their governments know it, and so do the people selling them grain. So what happens when someone decides to stop selling? Let me show you. 1972. The Soviet Union had a shit harvest. They needed grain, fast. So they quietly bought up massive quantities of American wheat, so much wheat that U.S. prices spiked 50%. Bread got more expensive in Detroit, and American taxpayers ended up subsidizing Soviet imports through government programs. The press called it the Great Grain Robbery. But here's the kicker. The Soviets didn't just get fed, they got leverage. By the mid-70s, the U.S. was so dependent on Soviet grain purchases that Nixon couldn't embargo them without screwing American farmers. Food became a bargaining chip, and the USSR knew it. Fast forward to today. Russia and Ukraine used to be the world's breadbasket. That's not a metaphor. They literally fed half of Africa and the Middle East. Then Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022. Grain exports stopped, ports were blockaded, prices exploded. Within 6 months, Sri Lanka's government collapsed. Pakistan nearly defaulted. Egypt's inflation hit 40%, and none of those countries were at war. They were just downstream. Russia didn't need to invade Egypt to destabilize it. They just had to fuck with Ukraine's wheat. That's the weapon, and it's invisible until it's too late. Now let's talk about what's happening right now. Because this isn't history, this is Monday. China has been buying up farmland and food supply chains across Africa, South America, and Southeast Asia for the last 15 years. They now control more foreign agricultural land than any country in history. Why? Because they've got 1.4 billion people and not enough arable land to feed them all. So they don't just import food, they import control. Chinese companies own the ports in Sri Lanka and Pakistan where grain gets unloaded. They own soybean farms in Brazil. They own pork processors in the U.S. When a famine or supply shock hits, China eats first. Everyone else waits in line. Meanwhile, climate change is turning reliable crop zones into dice rolls. The American Midwest had 3 once-in-a-century droughts in the last 20 years. India banned rice exports in 2023 to protect domestic supply, which screwed over 60 countries that depend on Indian rice. It wasn't evil, it was survival. But the result is the same. Someone goes hungry. And here's the part that should piss you off. The people designing this system, the traders, the banks, the hedge funds betting on grain futures, they profit more during crises. Volatility equals opportunity. Famine is a market condition. When bread prices double, someone's making a killing, literally. So where does this go? Because the trajectory is pretty clear. More countries are hitting water limits. Aquifers are drying up. Soils getting depleted. Fertilizer costs are tied to natural gas, which is tied to geopolitics, which means every time Europe pisses off Russia or the US sanctions someone, food gets more expensive in Jakarta. At the same time, populations are growing in exactly the places that can't feed themselves. Sub-Saharan Africa is expected to double in population by 2050. That's another billion mouths. Where's the food coming from? Who's shipping it? And what happens when the people controlling those shipments decide the price is too low or the buyer is too unfriendly? We're already seeing countries stockpile grain the way they stockpile oil. We're seeing export bans used as diplomatic pressure. We're seeing famines not because there's no food on Earth, but because someone decided it shouldn't go there. Food used to be a humanitarian issue. Now it's a national security issue. And most people still think it's just about farming. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The global food system isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed. It's just not designed for you. It's designed for profit, efficiency, and control. And the people who control it, whether they're commodity traders in Geneva, Chinese state firms, or governments playing supply chain chess, they don't need tanks or nukes to destabilize a country. They just need to stop a few ships, close a port, spike a price. Starvation doesn't start with famine. It starts with supply chains. And right now, the whole system runs on about 30 days of buffer stock and a prayer that nothing goes wrong in the Black Sea, the Suez, or the South China Sea. So next time you hear about a coup in some country you've never thought about, or protests over bread prices, or a government collapsing overnight, don't ask what went wrong politically. Ask what went wrong in the supply chain, because chances are someone just got screwed at breakfast, and that someone might be us next.